Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Shake Sales. I'm your host, Maggie, the sales evangelist at Mailshake. And today I'm super excited to talk with Maria Bras. She is a director of sales development at Revenue.io. And yeah, she's going to be talking to us today a little bit about cold calling. She's a 3-time LinkedIn Top 100 for sales. She's been in everything from outbound sales, sales enablement, and now leadership. And she just told me a great story beforehand where she actually is still getting on the phone for her team and, picking up if someone's out and, just really having that service leadership there. So Maria, could you take some time to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much, Maggie. And thanks for having me here today. I'm really excited for the conversation. I've been following you for a long time and learning from your posts. And so excited that we get to finally meet in person. But I think you did a great job introducing me. My background has always been in sales. I've been in sales the past decade, selling as an SDR, an AE. I've built a sales enablement program from the ground up, and then now transitioned into leadership the past 2 years. Now specifically, I'm a director of sales development at Revenue.io, where we help sales teams just get closer to their goals to hit quota and to learn sales, because it's so tough what we do. And so that's what I'm really passionate about is just helping salespeople hit their goals, learn sales, and have it impact not only their work life, but their personal life too, to become better listeners and just better communicators with the people that they care about.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And, you've been in sales for so long and it's really something that you've become passionate about. And it's so funny, even I've been in sales for 4 years and there's always more that we can learn, or there's always something that we can get back to. And I know that's something we'll touch on in this conversation. And I'm sure you've seen that in your position too, but
yeah.
Cool. Yeah. And I know I follow your content too. And I've listened to some of the podcasts and webinars that you've been on, and you talk a lot about call reluctance. So, for those of us out there that might not know a lot about it, could you tell us a little bit more about what call reluctance is and, how you help your team with that?
For sure. So I still battle with it today. I think so. Call reluctance is just being nervous, afraid, having anxiety about picking up the phone. And I think it's something that most of us, the majority of us, struggle with, at least in the beginning, right? Or if you start a new role, just picking up the phone and just the feeling of ooh, this person could reject me. And that doesn't feel good, right? Especially if you're not used to it. So I think that's one big barrier that new salespeople and tenured salespeople have to overcome if they're going to be successful in their role. Just because it is so challenging, right? But I think it's definitely achievable. You could definitely get past it, and end up enjoying your role. But it just takes a mindset shift. It takes supportive leadership. It takes really good preparation, coaching, training, so that sales reps can feel empowered to pick up the phone or to send that email, have that conversation with someone of, that's a C-level executive or someone who's been in their career, their industry for a long time. And so it's really important as sales leaders that we do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like some of it is, I remember when I first started cold calling and I just wasn't used to, and I feel like it's something that comes up now, is being on the phones in general, whether that be with, people at work or my family members and things like that. And we're kind of in this world of texting is just easier to get a message across, and you don't have the emotions of someone on the other side that you're listening to, which I know can be super scary for, again, just things in your personal life. So do you feel like that has some type of play in all of this?
Oh, for sure. Especially for this Gen Z, coming in, selling, that's what they've been used to. I mean, I'm a millennial, so I feel like I've kind of transitioned. I've done both things. I didn't have a cell phone until I think I was a sophomore in high school. I know my nieces and nephews now, they're getting them in 5th grade. I'm like, what? Yeah. You have a cell phone? You're texting me right now? So I think with the folks that are just out of school, recently, it's different because they're not calling to pick up the phone to call their friends. I feel like now I'll get a phone call from a friend. I'll be like, someone died. Is everyone okay? Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
It's not really typically to catch up. So yeah, I think that we're out of practice with the phone just in our personal life, and that makes it harder to pick up the phone in our professional life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because like you said, it's like when I get a phone call from a friend, I'm like, yeah, are things okay? So it's not that normal method of communication for us sometimes, but yeah, it still works. Obviously, I know people try to argue all the time, like cold calling is dead, or people try to tell me because I focus more on cold email that cold emailing is dead. But yeah, it's just the approach and how you go about it. It's still around. We all pick up the phone still. We all read emails, so there's no chance of it being dead. It's just
Yeah.
the attitude that you have going into it.
Yeah, I think that I can see that all the time too, and I always kind of laugh. I think it's a little bit clickbaity to say that literally any of those channels are dead. I think it's a multi-channel approach, and I will preach that until that no longer works and we have to do something else crazy to get attention of our prospects. But yeah, I mean, most certainly we are booking lots of phone calls or meetings over the phone, building relationships, connections over the phone and over email too, over LinkedIn, over video, text message, like everything. So I think that's what it takes. And I think there's going to be some reps too that are stronger in crafting really great emails. There's going to be some reps that are stronger in having really meaningful cold call conversations. And also too, I think we have to like define that term of what that means, like what a cold call actually means. Is it you're smiling, dialing down a list and you don't have no idea who's going to pick up the phone and don't really have a specific reason to be calling them? Like that I think is dead, right? Like that's
totally
tough to do now in this sort of environment. But I think like well-researched, prepared conversations that are like, hey, I have a specific reason to be calling you or I have a specific reason to be emailing you. That is definitely not dead. We're seeing great results from that.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point of like well-researched, well-prepared. And I think that's where, just in my experience, what I see with our own SDRs, for example, or other ones out there is that's where that confidence comes, where that call reluctance can go down a little bit because they are prepared. They feel good about who they're talking to and they know like, hey, this person could benefit from, what I'm going to be talking to them about. Because I get a lot of people and, there's a lot of similarities between obviously cold email and cold calling. They're obviously different, but there's some things that relate there. And I talk with a lot of people of, hey, really spend a lot of time with the people that you want to reach out to beforehand. Like look at your list of, let's say, the 10 people you want to look at today and think to yourself, like, could this person actually have a conversation about what I'm trying to sell or, taking the next step there? And I think that just comes with that confidence because, yeah, we've all been in maybe a position before where the next person we're going to call on that list is like, who is this person? Do you know what company they work at? And that is typically what makes all this outreach pretty scary for people.
Yes. I mean, you're spot on, at least from my experience, what was so challenging about that for me in the past. But I think that the more that you know, and it doesn't even have to necessarily be the specific person that you're reaching out to, but like if you have a really good understanding of the personas and like the triggers for outreach and like what does status quo look like? What's the frustrating scenario that they run into that your product can help address? So I think that that's important to think through with your leadership team. If you're listening and you're a SDR and AE, or if you're a sales leader, like you need to prepare your team with that. Even like have Q&A sessions with those types of ideal prospects, have them ask them questions, so that they can really read job descriptions, learn where those people learn. And I think that understanding of those personas, of their world, their challenges, their goals, where they're learning, the lingo that they're using, all of those different things can all build up and help new salespeople have really organic, good, meaningful conversations where that they can feel confident going into and saying, hey, I'm calling for this person for a specific reason. I'm calling to help them. And so I can have a lot of conviction in that versus feeling nervous of like interrupting them. And so I think that you're spot on. That's exactly where that confidence can come from. It just takes a little bit of research and back work to do that. And I think that's how you build the credibility too with them on the phones, no matter if you just started 2 weeks ago in sales or you're there for years.
Yeah, absolutely. It's being able to have that research in there, and then that's where that confidence can come in there, just like you talked about. And I think, yeah, just with this other idea too, I hear a lot, and I remember when I was sitting there as an SDR that creativity was pretty hard for me because I thought to myself like, hey, the person next to me is booking X amount of meetings with, the script that we went through or the playbook that we talk about here. But I know it's super important and for SDRs to try these different things out because, what worked for the person next to me when I was listening to them, that's like what made them successful and kind of find their own beat with things too. So I know creativity can be a scary subject for SDRs making cold calls. How do you coach for that creativity?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't even know if it's necessarily creativity. Like you see all of these, like, I feel like you'll see LinkedIn posts or Instagram posts of like, people sending a cake to get a job offer, right? Like I think there was like a Google post about that of like printing their resume on a cake and sending it into Google and getting an offer that way. So like those things are all really well and good. Like I think whatever you need to do to stand out, but that doesn't necessarily always mean that you have to do something completely oddball, right? Or completely off the wall. I think what I think it's important for folks that are prospecting to do is just like stand out and create. Being creative is one way to do that. But I think the easiest way to do that is just be authentically yourself. Talk like you're talking to a friend, use the language that you would. Don't try to like stifle who you are in these conversations in the name of like professionalism or like formalities, right? You hear a lot of like jargon dropped and different things like that. It's like, just drop the SAT words. Don't try to sound, smart. Just try to like you're talking to one of your teammates or your sales manager, right? You want to be professional, but just like not overly formal. And I think that when you're able to like adopt the language that you use in your normal life and when you're speaking with prospects, then that in and of itself will help set you apart. And that's it over email too, over the phone, in your videos that you're sending, really like through any channel. It's just like being who you are and embracing that. And cause so much of it is around tone. We have a rep on my team who's from Alabama, and she has like the most amazing thick Southern accent. And like, she just is completely herself and so confident on the phone. And that's not necessarily like a creativity thing, but it helps set her apart from, the scared SDRs picking up the phone and like, reading from a script. She goes off script and she's really great, meaningful, real conversations. And I think it's because she's been able to embrace that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you put it the exact great way because I think a lot of SDRs, they'll join a team and they want to mold to the top player there. Like, and I know that's a lot of, and not in a bad way, but managers will say like, hey, this person on the team is, and then we all see, our CRMs where people are closing the most amount of deals. So we kind of want to be like that person. We want to, get some intel of like, hey, what are they doing to book meetings? And I think that obviously helps to a certain extent, but I've seen SDRs, and I've even done it myself, where I try to like copy and paste their style of being on the phone or tone, and it just comes off so uncomfortable for me. And I remember being in that position, and I hear other SDRs talk about this too. It's just like, it's like, it has to be that perfect mixture of yourself plus obviously the playbook that your team puts in place for you because it works. But having those two different things.
I think it's so important, Maggie. Like, I've gotten lost in that so many times because I've said this before. I'm very candid about it. Like, sales did not come natural to me. Like, when I first started, I absolutely sucked. Like, I stumbled over my words. Like, I wasn't confident. Like, I wasn't listening. Like, I really, really struggled. And I think some of that too, one of the reasons that I struggled was like I was trying to fit into that mold of like whoever the top performer was, and that style wasn't necessarily like my style. So I was trying to be somebody I wasn't, which also led to the call reluctance because I was trying to hide who I was, and it just doesn't work. So I think to sales leaders out there too, like you can't copy and paste. Like your team is not like a robot, right? Like, so I think for them, like you have to give them the creative freedom to take your playbook and put it into their own words and their own style. And so like for my team, I don't even really give them a script for the calls. What we do is like, I break down the framework of a successful call of, hey, like this is what good sounds like the different steps of it. And then we just like practice in their own words, like chunk out what those different pieces are. And they put it in their own words. And I think that that's led to the most success, for them on the phones. And then also too, like we have libraries of, some of our top reps, the meetings that have, or the calls that have booked meetings and like that have been successful. But I encourage them to find someone, maybe more senior if they're brand new, that has like a similar style to them, right? Because there's going to be more than one top performer. There's probably, I don't know how many, it depends on your organization, but like there's probably lots of different people that you could learn from. And you're like, ooh, this person may be at 210% of their quota, but this other person's at 175% of their quota. And they sound like they sound a lot more like how I would explain this. So I'm going to try to adopt that.
Yeah. That's great. Like, yeah, there's going to be more than top performers out there, but making sure that you're kind of leaning towards a person that may sound like you. And you made a great point. I think it all comes down to, setting up a framework for your team and not necessarily scripts. It's, because all of us do have our own styles, but as long as we stick to a specific framework that's worked for our team and that's worked out there with cold calling in general, that's where that room for creativity or being yourself, and everything's just going to flow a lot more naturally there too.
Yeah. I like to give them the data of like, hey, this is what worked. Test it, try it out. It may or may not work for you. I don't know. And they'll come to me. I think when when reps first start, they'll be like, hey, we have this idea. Like, how does this sound? Do you think, like, is it cool if we do this? I'm like, yes, absolutely. Like, test it out. Like, I can't tell you if it's going to work or not. Try. And I think that like, that makes sales so much fun. It like, we talked a little bit about creativity earlier, like that creative freedom and like fostering that sort of environment is so important as sales leaders. Like you don't want to stifle that because that's what makes it fun. That's what helps the team not to burn out. And like you probably can learn something from your team because, we know that a lot of sales leaders haven't picked up the phone in 10 years. So like something might have changed. So like, don't stifle that, give them creative freedom. And if it doesn't work, then cool. Like, let's take a look back. Let's listen to it. What can we learn from this? How can we adjust and tweak and move forward? Because I think that's just as valuable as a win is finding out what doesn't work.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it sounds like, from what you're telling me today, Maria, that you give your team a lot of, freedom to be themselves, obviously, but also try things out, which I think is super important as a leader because, there's going to be times you're not on the phone. I mean, it's awesome that you take cold calls for your team, but you're not on the phone as much as them. You might, you might not be the one to be able to test things out or change up processes or messaging or things like that. And from what you said to me too, it's like you have this playbook of what a good cold call sounds like. But as far as like messaging with cold calling, I know sometimes like people will say like intros get stale for cold calling or, the way that people close or anything like that or ask for a meeting, can sometimes need like refreshing. And the same thing happens with cold email. Like what worked for me last year of like, or 2 I would say it's like 3 years ago now of quick question in an email. I can't use that anymore. And obviously that doesn't have to do with the whole framework of a cold email. Like there's still a framework that works, but that's like some messaging that I tried and didn't work. So to keep like messaging fresh when it comes to cold calling, what kind of processes do you have in place as a leader, to help your team out with that or just to kind of refresh your messages there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So again, I think it goes back to the framework. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
because the frameworks don't get stale necessarily. It's like I love like 30 Minutes of President's Club. I listen to a lot of podcasts. Like
Yeah.
they'll give you like little tips of things that are like kind of funny or like little like tactics and things to say, like what to say. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what gets sale. Like you were saying, like the
Mm-hmm.
subject line. And that I think is like fun and different. And then it's like, okay, well, wait, especially if you're selling into sales leaders or like marketing
Yeah.
leaders, that they're listening to the same podcast and they're reading the same things as you are. So it's like they're teaching their team that thing. So it takes
Mm-hmm.
a little bit out of it. But anyways, with that said, like, yeah, I think it's just all about frameworks and then also too listening to calls. Like I
Mm-hmm.
listen to so many calls a day, a week, and annotate them and give feedback. And I learn a lot from listening to my team's calls and my own calls as well, of like to keep a pulse on like what our market like cares about, what those people are talking about, and what's the latest, what their challenges are, all of those different things. So I think that that's really important too. Like I'll notice different use cases from that, or
Mm-hmm.
different problems that we can solve, or and I think that that helps a lot too to keep things fresh, and keep things more fun and not feeling so robotic. Is that, and then also the creative freedom for them to test their own talk tracks,
Mm-hmm.
and I encourage them. Like our leadership team is so great at revenue. Like they invest so much in our SDRs that like there's multiple SDRs that will like meet with our COO
Oh,
or, just
awesome.
someone else and be like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
can I test this talk track on you? Can I cold call you
Yeah.
real quick? And like mock role play, they'll give feedback and it's like they'll bring that what they learned back to the team. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just like different perspectives from different leaders. I also encourage them to join like Thursday night sales or Rev Genius or
Mm-hmm.
Pavilion and like learn from people outside of the company. And that also helps keep messaging fresh and what we're learning and doing differently.
Yeah. Yeah, you made really great points there, and two that I just want to point out of, yeah, going elsewhere maybe for that creativity. So encouraging reps to, not that they have to like go study in their off time when they're away from work, but maybe giving them some time like, hey, while you're looking at your list today or, updating your CRM, why don't you listen to this podcast or things like that. So just
Oh,
finding
yeah.
things, because there's so many sales things out there that you can listen to and borrow ideas from and test out. And then the second thing is listening back to calls as a leader. And I know it's an important thing for every leader out there in sales to listen back to calls or to read cold emails that are sending out and looking at responses. But it always feels like, I was just talking with Mark Akers the other day, who works at Allego, and he always says that it's, as a leader, it's like, it can always wait till tomorrow. It feels like one of those things on your list
Yeah.
that, could like wait till the next day, because we have all these tools that record things really well. But it is so important, to that point you just made of, what are people saying? Like, you need to have a pulse on there of what your team is doing too. Not that you want to micromanage, but just overall, hey, like, what's the total consensus of the messaging we're using, the sentiment that people are having on the phones? And without that, it's really hard to give that direction or creativity or even like guidance as a leader, I think. So that's awesome that it seems like it's a big part of what you do every week.
Oh yeah. I mean, I really feel for sales leaders that are managing remote teams and don't
Mm-hmm.
have the ability to listen to calls and to learn. That's actually why I ended up at Revenue. I was so passionate about that issue.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we sell. Right, is just like the ability to do that and coach in the moment, annotate those calls, and have the data to find what works.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think so much of this is like going off of hunches of what worked for you, and then like
Mm-hmm.
trying to create, and it's so well meaning from sales leaders that I see like, oh, this is what worked for me, and they like try to just kind of like create little mini me's.
Yeah.
But I think it's almost like that failure in sales for me was almost a little bit of a blessing, because it gives me a different perspective into helping my team, where I am not trying to create mini me's. Like they are going to be way better salespeople than I ever was. So I think like that's almost a little bit of a blessing, where I want them to learn. I want to learn from them and from their conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And then my job really is to like create this environment where they can learn from each other and for me to like analyze these calls, look at the data, and not have to go off of hunches of what I think will work.
Yeah.
And in any of those examples of me giving call feedback or feedback where I'm going off a hunch, I let them know that too. So it's like, hey, take it or leave it. This is my thoughts on this, but like there's so many different perspectives, and so it's sometimes tough, but I'm very lucky and grateful that I do most of the time have data to support and back that call feedback.
Yeah. And that just gives you more confidence as a leader going into a conversation and being able to be vulnerable with it too, of like, hey, this might be a hunch that I have, but here's some of the data that I'm getting back from, what I'm listening to here. But yeah, I think it's super important, especially in the remote world. It's like we've needed these tools in the past, but now we really, really, really need them, because I know, and you probably started out this way too, it's like I had my manager sitting 2 seats down from me, listening to what I was saying on the phone. And it was intimidating, but I learned really quickly of how I could change things that I was doing wrong. And I was thankful for that. And now it becomes a bit more tricky, but not impossible. And it's just a different shift of technology, which we all have and use. But yeah, it's just the matter of actually utilizing it and putting it into practice there too.
Absolutely. Yeah. I come from the generation of like them plugging, like people starting and like you pulling out a bunch of cords out of your cubicle and like trying to hook up and figure out like to your phone, like your landline, like, and listen in and then be like, hey, or like writing down for you. And it's like, oh man, like have we come a long way since that? But yeah, I think we can do now like the virtual version of that. And, gosh, that took me back, Maggie. That whole like, what that used to look like. But yeah, luckily now technology has caught up to that and helps us now in a virtual world.
Yeah. Now we have stylish AirPods that we're both wearing. Instead of, I remember just holding like a landline phone and I'm like, this is pretty inefficient for me to like take notes. Now there's tools out there that just lay out the notes for you. So totally. But awesome. Well, it's been great talking with you, Maria, and talking a little bit about how you coach your team with cold calling and creativity and just, that confidence that you give them from your leadership. And I really appreciate you going through that. Before we finish up, where can people find you if they want to learn a little bit more about cold calling or coaching or things like that?
Yeah, of course. You can find me on LinkedIn. I don't think I've ever denied a connection request. So find me on LinkedIn, message me if you want to brainstorm together at Revenue too. Sometimes I sit on our chat bot and like talk with our website visitors. So you might get me there also. But yeah, I've really enjoyed the conversation, Maggie, and excited to hopefully have conversations with your listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Thank you so much for being on here, Maria. And thanks everyone for listening to another episode of Shake Sales. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Thanks, Maggie. Bye.